today we have a very special guest who straddles many facets. He's an entrepreneur, he's an investor, he's an author, he's a mentor to his entrepreneur daughter. I've never said this to him, but I always find a professor in him whenever I talk to him. So he's also the chairperson of the Doon School. He has a very active family office. He's also very active in his associations like CII. So let me welcome Mr. Sunilkant Munjal here. Mr. Munjal, welcome to BW Dialogue, and thank you for talking to BW Business World. It's an honor and privilege.
Thank you for inviting me.
Mr. Munjal, how have been the last 120 days for you? What has kept you personally and professionally busy?
So in some ways, it's been a strange time. While in others, it's been business as usual, because while we are all locked in at home, but technology has allowed us to continue to do work. So same has been the case for me. Actually, I find my schedule has become even busier than earlier, because people assume that you're at home, so you get requests for meetings all the time, including on weekends. So this right now, for example, this is my fourth meeting of the day already that's taking place. And in the initial phase, I got quite involved with trying to help some of the authorities, some of the governments, both at the local, state and the central level, with addressing the response to the pandemic by way of looking at capacities of hospitals, ICUs, ventilators, protective gear, and the like. And we also set up through CII an alliance of automotive, auto component, and medical device companies to help create some additional capacity. We got in some of the consultants to work with the governments to help them with the back end to managing data and information, because it is a crisis of unforeseen proportion. It's not something that anyone was prepared for. So after the initial shock in the first few days, I think we got down quickly to business to try and see what it is that we can all do. In our homes, in our offices, we created all the protection at the entrance and protocols inside. So it was a harrowing time to begin with, but I'm glad that we were able to address it in a manner that with a very balanced view after that. We have been working literally day to day, week to week, and clearly seeing some improvement. So I have spent a lot of time at work. Of course, the advantage I got was staying at home, because I got to spend more time with my grandkids. I have two twin grandkids. So that was a wonderful break for me in that sense.
Fantastic. Mr. Munjal, as I said in the introduction, you straddle many worlds. So if I had to ask you, Mr. Munjal, the entrepreneur, Mr. Munjal, the investor, Mr. Munjal as a knowledge and creative expert, because I find whenever I talk to you, there is a certain, takeaways I have, which as if, I'm talking to, a B school professor, or I'm talking to an educationist, or Mr. Munjal as a philanthropist. What is the one role which is more important to you, or and these times is most important to you?
So Anurag, I'm sure you are a son, a brother, a friend, a cousin, a brother to many. So each one of us in any case plays many roles. And for me, I have actually enjoyed doing everything that I do. One thing I try and do is not do things that I'm not passionate about. And because I'm passionate about all the things you mentioned, it becomes easy for me to actually switch from one to the other. And I don't do it as if imagining I'm shutting one door down and then entering the other one. If you enjoy them, you do it seamlessly as well. And many of them are actually in some sense connected. The book I wrote was about our own company in the family, my father and his brothers. What the investments we look for, things that we enjoy ourselves and things which have a positive social impact. So in some sense, these are all connected activities, and it goes back to one's own persona. And I always believe that if you can get to do what you like, it's not like work at all. It's
Right.
not a chore. It's not a punishment to get up and go to work.
Confucius said, if you make your hobby your profession, you don't have to work. You are saying exactly the same.
Yeah.
So let me, since you talked about social impact, and I talked about you being a philanthropist, now I know through your family office, you've been making investments. Tell us, what is the criteria you follow when you make investments? And is there a playbook to it?
So, one, I should tell you is whatever we do by way of philanthropy, charity, CSR, and our business investments through the investment office, there is some similarity in all of them. One of the things we decided a long time ago was the realization to accept that we are very blessed, very fortunate. I would say all of the people who are listening to this that you have on your this meeting today, because there is a small percentage of the world which has the access to quality education and good quality opportunities. We've all had them. So, and we live in a country where there are 250 million people who don't even get 2 square meals a day. So the least we have is the responsibility to do things which will better society, which will create more opportunities, which will help others. And these are not bad for the other one. It's not a 0-1 sum game. This is truly a win-win. So the philosophy that we use when we look at investments is that we will invest in companies where the leadership team displays a passion for the product or service that they are making, that there is a felt need for that product or service in the market, that is going to have a positive social fallout. These are, by the way, in addition to, of course, like anybody else, we have a financial criteria, but these are additional criteria that we choose to add as filters on top of the rest. And the last one is that we would like to invest in those entities which show leadership potential, that in a reasonable period of time, they will be able to get to amongst the leading companies in their chosen field, and they can impact the future and fortune and destiny of the industry itself, and thereby impact society in a positive way, much more than they would as individual enterprises as well.
Okay, thank you so much for bringing that thread of gratitude and bringing that element of stating that we all are blessed because we have so much to thank God for, and hence it is our duty to give back. So you look at financial criteria, but you also look at the fact that how does it give back to the society, and whether the founders have the passion to be a leader in that domain.
And we also like those who do some lateral thinking, a little bit out of the box.
Beautiful, because that's what creates the ideas for future. That's what creates something which changes the world, so to say. Now we are in COVID times. Healthcare has become the most important thing, and our healthcare infrastructure has done decently well, relatively speaking, but we have a long way to go. And I know you, about 2 years back, you made a bid for a big healthcare chain. So tell us, is Mr. Munjal and his family going to make more investments in healthcare? How do you see the Indian healthcare ecosystem evolving post-COVID?
So we are in some sense already involved in healthcare. I chair a teaching hospital in Ludhiana, which is one of the largest in the country right now. We are over 1,900 beds in one location with 26 super specialties. And I think outside of Delhi, we must be the largest hospital in North India. Our college is ranked amongst the top in North India as well. And we are amongst the leading hospitals in the country in any case. But we don't publicize, we don't make announcements, we don't do any advertisement at all. And that's the way we prefer to do things in any case. So coming to India's healthcare. So India's healthcare is at a very strange situation. We have two extremes. On the top end, our healthcare institutions are very good. They're like any global institution. But you take 1 or 2 steps down and the entire thing just fritters away. We have 2 challenges. One is of reach. Not enough people have access to quality healthcare. And second is of quality itself. The healthcare that's available to the majority of this nation is of very low quality, and that's not okay. You cannot have a country progress if its people are not healthy. And more than healthy, more than hospitals, you need proactive, preventive quality public health. You need people to live healthier lifestyles. That's where you have to start from. But the healthcare system has got to be strengthened. So I think the realization that our healthcare system is not up to scratch is quite clear right now. The need to increase the spend on healthcare has been there for 40 plus years. You can go back to speeches of the budget speeches of 30 or 40 years ago. You will hear the same statement made. Both on education and healthcare, we've had statements saying we should have 6% of the GDP spent on either one of these, each one of these. So, but where we are, as you know, is quite clear right now. It is far, far below where we need to be.
So global is 6%. We
Yes.
spend less than 3%, as you rightly say.
Yeah, we are very low. Actually, we are in education, we are even below 2%. So we are far from where we need to be. But interestingly, this is what gives us the opportunity to leapfrog a few generations of development, like we did, for example, in the telecom business. Because we were so far behind, we were able to go to the digital age in one leap. I think that is what we should do here. We should use unique digital solutions which will help us do things at a much lower cost than we would otherwise do. But we also need to create this connection between the ASHA worker in the villages, to the primary healthcare center, to the district hospital, to the tertiary centers in the large cities. So some of the tertiary hospitals need to go out outside of the large cities, but the chain needs to be strengthened. The moment you do that, you can actually achieve what you are talking about and what I'm talking about at a significantly lower cost than trying to build top-class hospitals in every city or every town and every village of this country. Because that is not possible. That is not practical. That kind of funding we will never have. So, and nowhere in the world is it done, actually. So we have actually a unique opportunity. There is enough focus. I hope once this issue gets resolved, we do not lose the focus right away. As things tend to happen many times, there are many other priorities, as you know. We have a shortage of land mass available for industrialization. Water is an issue. Air quality is an issue. So we have many challenges to address right now. Improvement in our railways, improvement in air traffic, waterways. So I hope we are able to do these concurrently and not one at the cost of the other.
Fantastic. Let me move on to another area which is very, very close to your heart. You alluded to education. Now, I know that you have been a chairperson of the Doon School, which is your alma mater. You're also the chairperson of the chancellor of the Shri Brij Mohan Lal Manjal University, which your nephew is also involved with. Education is very close to your heart. And tell us, what is the future for education? And these days we keep talking of the hybrid learning model, the blended learning model. So is a university on the cloud a possibility in 5 years from now?
Absolutely. So the new education policy that has been announced only recently is a complete game changer. But it will be only as much of a game changer as the implementation that gets done. As you know, for any plan, any strategy, it's only as good as it's executed. And this is a subject which the central government cannot do by diktat alone. This requires the support and implementation and partnership of the state governments as well. Fortunately, the entire system has been feeling the need for this change, because for too long we have been teaching by rote, teaching kids to become crammers rather than to think for themselves. The biggest change in this policy is three. One is leaning on the best of the old Gurukul teachings, which were life skills as well. And second is the best teaching of any of the top institutions in the world right now. So it combines the two. So which is why I'm actually very excited about this education transformation as an opportunity. But our biggest challenge is going to be what it has been for the last 30 or 40 years, is to get the right quality and the right quantum and number of faculty to actually execute this. Technology will be a very big driver. Therefore, university on the cloud is not only possible, by the way, it already exists. So there are MOOCs as programs that you can take, which will allow you to get fully educated without physically going to a college. But it has also been said that while technology allows you to do a lot, but the physical interaction is part of the education. The friendships that you make with your faculty and your colleagues are those friendships which remain with you for life, which may or may not be as good or as easy to do if you're doing everything digitally. The current young generation, of course, is used to doing much more digitally than the earlier generations were. So for them, this is their normal. So I do believe education is set for a big change. The question is how long we take to create this transformation, because sometimes when you take too long to implement something, you actually end up not getting the full result that you originally envisaged. So I hope we can get a buy-in from all the players who are involved: parents, students, faculty, universities, regulators, governments, to create this big push for India to continue to go back to where India was. India was the leader in education and knowledge worldwide for many, many centuries. We lost it for the last 3 centuries. I hope we can get that back.
Fantastic. Let me come to business and economy. Currently, the liquidity is an issue overall. There are groups that are more cash rich than others. There are sectors that are more cash rich than others. But overall, there is a liquidity issue. Do you think how should the government address it? And what is your advice to entrepreneurs in these tough times where money is at a premium source?
So you're right. There's a big issue right now with liquidity. So first, let's come to what companies are currently doing who got caught with this unexpected situation. So there are 3 things that are going on right now. One is cash conservation has become the mantra across all businesses, all companies. Even those who have liquidity, by the way, even they are following this cash mantra right now, cash conservation. The second is looking at how technology can make their businesses more efficient, including some of the most conservative and traditional companies are looking at including and inducting technology in different aspects of the business. The third is building a new cost and efficiency model, completely new. Instead of saying, I will do 5% more or 10% less here, they're saying, let's do a de novo, zero-based costing and a zero-based activity for our model and come out of this much healthier. If you see, interestingly, the results which have been announced in the last quarter are very interesting results. If you observe them, and you do because you're an observer of businesses, that while the top line has taken a beating, in many companies, the bottom line has actually improved, despite the top line taking a massive beating. So companies are beginning to get more efficient. And one thing we have to do, because we want to follow this Atmanirbhar Bharat to become more self-reliant, but without isolating ourselves from the world, we will become part of the global value chain. Therefore, it is imperative that we are globally competitive, that each of our activities is at least as good as the best places in the world. So this is a unique opportunity. Going back to your liquidity question, the Reserve Bank has done many things to encourage banks to give money and lower the cost of money for banks. Unfortunately, banks are very risk averse because if you remember the last crisis that we had in 2008, banks went in with a 2.7% non-performing loan book. This time it was already about 10%. Now this is, some say, hitting 12% already. So they are in a very difficult situation. So banks are willing to lend money, but only to the top rated companies. Any company which is not top rated is finding it very hard to raise funding. So there are innovative instruments now which are available. So companies have to get innovative in this kind of a time to look at how they will raise cash. So commercial paper has come back, bonds have come back into the market. So there are many new tools available. I think it's about time that companies start to widen their own portfolio of access to funding rather than only traditional banks. NBFCs have a big role to play, although they are the last mile funders, but they themselves are in a tough situation like banks. So I think the support that has been given to banks and NBFCs should start reflecting in their ability to lend to companies, which it has done so far, but only partially.
Okay, I agree with you that for the first time, promoters, entrepreneurs, investors, boards are asking the right questions, and that is leading to rationalization of cost. Because we know when things were hunky-dory, we never looked at our cost structure. we're always focused on revenue.
Yep.
And I keep saying cost is the only certainty, revenue is a hope. So you echoed the same sentiment. Let me shift gears from established companies, established corporates, and I know big companies are having cash crunches, big entrepreneurs, not just small entrepreneurs. But let me go to entry-level entrepreneurs, startup entrepreneurs, people who have an idea that excites Mr. Munjal's, it aligns with your vision. Now, what is your advice to those entrepreneurs? Because in the last 4 months, some of those have seen significant drop in revenues, plus they've not been able to raise money. So what is your advice to those entrepreneurs?
So the one thing that we have been telling every young company is to look at their business model afresh and look at it from the outside, what it looks like objectively, and take a hard, harsh look. If the business model needs to pivot, do so now. It's a great opportunity because under compulsion, you can get away with anything. So people will accept the change that you're making in the business model. Some may have to create a new market. Some may have to focus sharply on the same market. Some may have to use a different tool for getting customers. So the solution is not the same for everybody, but the approach is the same, is to ensure, again, I'm going back to cash conservation. So we have been advising companies to ensure that even with no or low revenues, they are able to last for the next 20 to 24 months, should be the attempt that they should make. Because the corona situation, the caused by this, is not going to go away in a hurry. While business will start coming back, we will start seeing some improvement, but the overall situation will still take a while. It is important, therefore, to be able to last out this period and come out stronger at the end of this, so that you are able to address your own, not just your survival, but you can actually figure out a way to thrive and not only survive. And some companies, by the way, are doing this right now. It's very interesting. You should ask this question, because the question is there with everybody, but only a few are able to get their head around this situation and saying, I'm not hell-bent on only following the same path I've been following so far. I am willing to look afresh at my whole approach and my objectives and see if I need to tweak them a little bit under the current circumstances. Because there are some businesses which will see high growth in the future because of what has happened, and some which will actually completely die. Many companies, incidentally, there is a big issue right now, and this is not just for startups. Many companies will shut down, never to reopen. And we have to be prepared for that eventuality as well, and the social fallout of the kind of job losses we will see coming out of that.
Yeah, and you're right, we have to look at the social impact on livelihoods. So I think that's the reality, and it does, it could upset the social fabric in some way.